Hello, and welcome to this week's Deck Tech. I'm your host, Nick Papadopoulos, and today we'll be looking over Niv Mizzet Parun. Niv Mizzet Parun's casting cost is 3 blue and 3 red. He is a 5 power and toughness with flying. He has 3 unique abilities. He cannot be countered. You don't see this ability too often on many cards. It is very unique in the sense that it has an inbuilt protection against a lot of control players. It also means he can only be removed once he hits the board, and one less thing you have to protect against. Whenever you draw a card, Niv Mizzet Parun deals 1 damage to any target. This is both a win condition, and we can use it as a control element. It allows us to hit planeswalkers hiding behind an army of tokens, or pick off small creatures threatening to swing in at us. And his final ability, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you may draw a card. So drawing cards for players playing the game, that sounds pretty good to me. It will also make our opponents think about casting sorceries and instances. So what direction do we want to steer this deck towards? For the most part, we'll be building a Spellslinger deck. Spellslinger decks are based mostly around instances and sorceries and have win cons based off of them. We will also be interacting with our opponent's plays and casting spells at their end step before your turn. So what kind of interaction cards should we include into this deck list? I've always felt that counter spells aren't always the best type of interaction, but do include a few into our kit. Cards like Swansong, Counterspell, and of course Disallow. There are some types of cards you need a hard shutdown for. Once someone plays a spell that will exile your win con or destroy a permanent of yours, that is where these few counters come in handy. Having a few cards to interact and prevent those plays will push you into a win. The types of interaction that I mostly run in this deck are cards like Chaos Warp or Rapid Hybridization or Reality Shift, Cyclonic Rift, or Red Elemental Blast. Chaos Warp is an extremely powerful card and one I find really underrated. When there's a deck with a lot of graveyard recursion, it really shines to be able to put it back into that player's deck. However, there has been times that I have used this card to bounce it into a player's deck, only to end up with the same card back on the field. Now, blue doesn't have much creature removal in terms of destroying them, so Rapid Hybridization is a must include into your deck. Now, you're going to run into situations where a creature is indestructible. Reality Shift is our answer to remove them from the board for good. Now, Cyclonic Rift is one of the best design spells we run in this deck. Being able to bounce back each and every non-land permanent back to their opponent's hand is extremely powerful. You can use this in response to a big attack towards you, or at the end step before your turn. Pair it with cards like Windfall to make them discard all of it right into the graveyard is really putting a hurting in. Now, since our commander is geared towards drawing cards, we run a lot of draw spells. Cards like Brainstorm, Opt, Impulse, Frantic Search, Dig Through Time, and of course everyone's favorite, Blue Sun Zenith. Now, Brainstorm is a great card to be running in this deck. Being able to rearrange the top 3 of your deck is very advantageous. If we have 3 big spells we cannot use right away, or want to rearrange what we draw into, this is one of the best cards to do so. Impulse is another card that is great at rearranging the top of our deck. This time, putting cards we don't want to the bottom of our deck. This can be important later in the game when we don't need many lands and the top of our deck is all lands. We don't have a lot of recursion in our deck, so using our graveyard to reduce the cost of this card should be no problem for us. When we cast Dig Through Time for only 2 blue mana, we can string together powerful combinations of spells by finding what we want from the top 7 of our deck. All the cards mentioned we should be using at the end step before our turn to gather as much card advantage over our opponents as possible. Let's talk about strategy in using our interactive cards. For the most part, our goal is to draw a ton of cards. Our priority will be trying to not use removal spells unless we have to. If an opponent is going to go off and win the game, we interact. If someone is about to play a big spell that could lead to a major disadvantage, we interact. We have to gauge how big of a setback will the spell our opponent is casting be, or if we can manage to take 1 or 2 creatures swinging at us. Also, we must use priority to our advantage If we know there's a chance another player has removal, then let them take care of it. It leaves us more options later on and doesn't drain our hand of cards. Since our goal is to be casting as many spells as possible, we also want to try and make those spells as mana efficient as possible. If we can bring the cost of our cards down to 1 or 2, we can string a series of spells together. We run cards like Helm of Awakening, Goblin Electromancer, Primal Amulet, Baral Chief of Compliance, and of course, Mizzet of the Magnus. We also run cards that have benefits to us casting instants and sorcery spells. Cards like Electrostatic Field, Young Pyromancer, Gutter Snipe, Tolerant Sky Summoner, and of course, Aetherflux Reservoir. All these cards interact with the spells we're casting, either dishing out damage or creating creatures for us. So now we know the setup of our deck. How do we win? Well, since our commander has the ability to deal damage when we draw, and we draw cards when we cast, the simple way to do this is to draw a ton of cards and cast a lot of spells. Our main win condition will not only be casting our spells, but the spells from our opponent's deck with one of my new favorite cards, Chaos Wand. So, how does Chaos Wand win us the game? If we have our commander, Gutter Snipe, or Aetherflux Reservoir, every time we cast an instant or sorcery from our opponent's deck, we'll be ticking each opponent up for damage or increasing our life total to kill them with Aetherflux Reservoir. But wait a minute, Chaos Wand can only be used once since it taps, unless we run it with cards like Paradox Engine. Pair it with Mana Rocks that tap for a total of 4 mana, and every single time we cast a spell from our opponent's deck, Paradox Engine is going to untap our Mana Rock and Chaos Wand for us, leading us into an infinite combo, casting out every single spell from their deck. So not only now do you have your own spells to cast, but you'll have every instant and sorcery from your opponent's deck all in one turn. Now, setup is important. As soon as you play Paradox Engine, every single opponent will be looking to remove it. Everyone will know what you're trying to achieve with that card. It is one of the easiest ways to set up combos, and once destroyed or removed from the game, can make it very difficult for you to secure a win. You will want to line up your Mana Rocks just right and play Paradox Engine. Then play a cheap spell that will unlock your Mana Rocks because of Paradox Engine, and then go to cast Chaos Wand with your Mana Rocks. Once you have started your combo, it will be very, very hard for your opponents to interrupt. If someone tries to destroy your Paradox Engine or Chaos Wand in response, you can simply cast an instant spell from your hand to untap your rocks as well as your Chaos Wand. This allows you to continue to cast on the stack prior to having your Chaos Wand or Paradox Engine destroyed. This is also the reason why we want to run a few counterspells for key moments such as this. Assembling these cards is no easy task. A lot of them will have higher mana costs and make it difficult to get out. We also need ways to be able to tutor for them to either bring them into play or put them into our hand. So we're going to run cards like Mystical Tutor, Personal Tutor, Merchant Scroll, Fabricate, Trinket Mage, Trophy Mage, Imperial Recruiter, Spellseeker, and of course War of Invention. Our tutor package ranges from grabbing instances and sorceries, artifacts we need, or a creature. Let's talk about pros and cons of our deck list. Pros: drawing lots of cards. We really have a high card count focused around drawing cards and finding solutions to the board state. Having an inbuilt ability on our commander to draw cards based off our opponents playing sorceries and instances makes Niv Mizzet Parun so valuable. Pro number 2, our ability to play passively. A lot of players like to run headfirst with their big creatures. We get to sit back and decide what we want and how to execute it. The big creature isn't swinging at us, well, we'll let it hit the other player and draw cards at the end step. And last but not least, I always say this, politics. Politics is so important in every aspect of gameplay. Being able to say, hey, if you don't swing it at me, I don't need to get rid of it. It's so powerful to be able to do that. Of course, always be careful not to overbluff or give too much information. Your opponents don't really need to know if you have a counter in your hand. Let's talk about cons. Con number 1, we are weak to aggro. most games I play that someone is overly aggressive towards me, it becomes very, very difficult to fend off. We have limited creatures and limited creature removal. If you start to get focused down from someone who has creatures out turn 1 through 3, consider grabbing either a card like Young Pyromancer or Tolerant Sky Summoner from your deck. This should help ease the pressure and have them attack someone else. Con number 2, our mana base. Niv Mizzet Parun is 3 blue and 3 red. This isn't exactly easy to get the perfect combination of lands and mana rocks. We need to run a lot of dual lands in order to combat this issue. And lastly, blowing steam way too early. What that exactly means is going in way too early with your combo and not being able to finish the game. If you have cards like Paradox Engine on the board more than one turn, it's usually going to get destroyed. You have to be careful not to overextend and play a little bit more safe. Remember, we are a reactive deck. Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's deck tech. I'll be doing my best to get one out every week. If you have any deck in particular you'd like to see built, playtest, and reviewed, hit me up in the comments below. Also, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button below.